I'm using imagery here that relates to my woodlands project, but also the focus of this piece of artwork. So I'm going to find a nice page that I like the look of, and then I'm going to photocopy that. Now, if you don't have access to a photocopier, do not worry, you can take a picture of the page that you like and then send it to your printer. So I've chosen to print this out in black and white. If you do go for colour, that's not a problem, but do just be wary that it might be quite overwhelming. The technique I'm going to demo here is really quick and it's really simple. You're going to take some dried coffee. You can use any kind of coffee. You can also use tea, but coffee is going to get you a much darker, rich result. To that, you're going to add in some warm water, and then you're simply just going to stir it for a bit. Now, if you get a much higher concentration of coffee to water here, you're going to get darker results. If you go a bit lighter with the amount of coffee you put in, it is going to give you lighter colour on your paper. Now, to this, I'm going to use a sponge. You can use a brush, anything that's going to soak up that coffee, and then you're just going to rub that across the surface of the paper. Don't get too carried away here because you're going to start to damage and buckle the paper. We just want a nice light layer, and that will instantly add some colour. You can go in different directions. You can, as you can see here, dab some droplets on top to make it look a bit more worn down. Once it dries, you're going to get some lovely results. There's going to be some little spots that pop up that perhaps you didn't have before, and it will generally be darker. Now, it is natural that it ripples slightly, but don't worry about that. It all works with this kind of vintage feel that we're going for. So before we get going, this is the setup that I'm using. Now, by no means is it going to look exactly the same where you are, and this is the joy of this project, really. It's so open to interpretation, and it really does just make the most of what you've got at home. Now, there are a couple of things that we definitely need to make sure we've got in front of us, one of which is the artist reference to Giles Oldershaw and also Robert Kushner, because those are the two artists that we're focusing on. I've also got my reference image of the owl, which is the image that I'm going to be using up at all times, and then in front of me I've got my selection of materials that I'm going to be using at some point. Just a closer look here to show you what I've got. I've got different kinds of cardboard, I've got paper, I've got some pages from magazines, pencils, some masking tape. There's a good selection of things on offer here. I'm starting with a sheet of cartridge paper. It would be better to use thicker quality paper. If you've only got print paper at home, then not to worry. If you've got something thicker, something sturdier, then go with that. Now, it doesn't matter if you've got it landscape, if you've got it portrait, it's whatever works for you. As you can see, I'm starting to layer up some of my sheets of paper here. At this stage, nothing is final. It's all about just getting a feel for what I want to do. So nothing is getting stuck down. I'm just having a bit of a play around. I'm going to start ripping some bits of paper up. Nothing is too precious here. Don't take this too seriously, and don't get too bogged down with making it look perfect. Look at the artists. They are a little bit rough and ready. Look at the materials we're using. Look at our project of woodlands. It's not meant to be pristine. It's meant to be quite organic and real, and we want to capture that. We don't want to lose that. Don't forget to keep looking back at Robert Kushner here and see what kind of things he would do. Kushner's backgrounds often come across as being quite busy and quite overwhelming, and if we strip that back, I think, to be honest, that's just the nature of the artwork as a whole. But looking at the backgrounds, they are not overly complicated. Sometimes it's just a case of one piece of text, one image. Sometimes it's a little bit more, but in this case I'd say to underdo it rather than overdo it, because you don't want your final image to be lost against the background. What you might want to also have a little look at is now being more deliberate with what you're applying to your background. It's perfectly fine to tear things up, to be quite scrappy, but there are going to be occasions where you think, I actually quite like that piece, that image in particular. I'm going to be more careful with how I add that in. So for that reason, as much as it's great to just be ripping bits up, as I say, sometimes you can be a little bit more calculated and purposeful. You might want to take a ruler, you might want to measure things up a bit, and it just gives it a nice balance of being organised mess. That's kind of what we're going for here, a bit of organised chaos. So it's starting to get to the point now where I'm happy with the background. I don't want to overthink it too much. I'm going to look at my reference image and think, where will I position this? Where is this going to sit on my background? What am I going to lose, and what things am I still going to be able to keep? Past this point, it's now a case of sticking things down. You don't want to get, too ahead of yourself and end up with bits of your background falling off. So do now take some time once you're happy to glue your background into place, and know that that's now set as what you're going to be working on top of. As much as I'm saying not to overdo this step and not to overwork the background, at a later stage I do actually come back to the background and work a few more pieces into it after the final image has been completed. What we're doing now is looking at our second artist, Giles Oldershaw. Now, there's a couple of things to highlight with the use of this artist, one of which is texture, and we're going to get on to that in the next step of the video. The first thing to look at is the use of cardboard to add layers, to add some height to the piece. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take my image and I'm going to draw my image onto a piece of paper, and I'm going to transfer that to the cardboard, and the cardboard will actually be what the image is drawn onto. I've got my image here drawn onto a piece of paper. It's just a really quick sketch, and then from here it gets transferred onto cardboard. Now, I've cut this out just to make it a little bit easier to get a sense of. The reason I've done this on paper first is just to check that everything is the right size, and when we talk about composition, it's just to make sure that it's going to work against the background. So as I place that against the background, I'm just going to move it around slightly, and that is just to give me an idea of where it's going to look at its best. Once I'm happy, I'm going to pop that onto the piece of cardboard. I'm going to use this to capture the outline, and I'm going to then start drawing onto the cardboard. Now, before we go any further, I just want to go back to Giles Oldershaw and talk about texture, which is something I brought up before. Now, one of the main reasons we're using this artist as reference is because of the lovely texture that he brings to his artwork. So as well as your reference to Robert Kushner, as well as using cardboard to add layering to your work, what we really want to do here is to bring some texture through. So if you can get hold of some thicker cardboard and you peel back the top surface of that cardboard, you'll see that there's a lovely corrugated pattern underneath. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing that. I've got a Stanley knife or a craft knife that I peel the surface back with. If you've got one at home, you can use that, but only really if you feel comfortable to do so in a safe environment. If you haven't got one, then don't worry. I'm going to show you that you can do this with a pencil, or even a pair of scissors, just to really, as long as you get under that top surface, you can pull it back with your fingers. Take a good look as well at the fact that Giles Oldershaw uses that layering of cardboard to suggest lighting. It's about mid-tones, it's about your light tones, it's about your dark tones. The light tones are obviously captured with white, and even in this case with white paint. The mid-tones are going to be a little bit darker, and then your darker tones are perhaps the corrugation of the cardboard coming through. So in your reference image, have a good look, like you would do anyway, whether you were drawing or painting, at going from light to medium to dark, making sure you've got that lovely contrast. So I'm pretty much done. I'm really happy with how it came out. I think it's a lovely balance between the two artists, and I'm pretty pleased. However, it looks like it's just been plonked on the background, and it looks like it's sort of floating randomly, and if truth be told, it is. So what we're going to do is just address the composition and how to make it look like it belongs there. So I'm pulling in a couple of extra pieces that I've prepared. There's also another reference to birds on that piece of paper, which ties everything in quite nicely. So talking about composition, I'm also talking about the foreground, midground and the background. So the piece I've just added in, that now forms part of the background. The owl sits in the middle as the midground, and then the piece on top is then the foreground. So there's this whole discussion of depth to the piece, which has now been quite nicely brought together with the addition of the cardboard. As you can see at the bottom, the bottom piece also hides the fact that the owl sort of disappears into nowhere as well, and it brings it all together. Just as a final thing that you can do to this piece of artwork is have a go at putting it in a setting that relates to the theme that you've chosen. You could shine a torch on it, capture some nice lighting, some shadows, maybe even pop it outside. I know it sounds a little bit random, but anything that you can do to evidence your development of this is all going to work in your favour.